What's up? This is tbriz. Today we're going to make a beat with a sample. I'm over here in tracklib and I found this song that I think we're going to use. When I heard the first part of this song, it reminded me of a beat that Drake and Rick Ross might have collaborated on back in the 2000s or 2010s. So we're gonna make that type of beat today, a Drake and Rick Ross type beat with the sample in FL Studio. Let's get into the tutorial. Okay, we got our new project started. First things first, let's set this tempo to the tempo of the song that we're pulling in. It is 140, that's what tracklib says. Now let's hit F5 to bring up the playlist window. Let's drag and drop in the sample that we downloaded from tracklib. I am not sponsored by tracklib, by the way. I just use their service and I think they have a great UI for digging for samples. We got the audio pulled into the project. There's a couple things we want to do with this first. Let's F5 to close that again. F9 to bring up the mixer window. First, I'm going to set up my preview track. If you don't know what a preview track is, I have a YouTube short that I'll link in the description and it explains what this is and why it's useful. Now that we have that on 1, let's select Insert 2. Make sure we have our audio clip selected. Right-click Insert 2, Channel Routing. Route selected channels to this track. I'm also going to right-click and rename this to Full Song. I'm naming it Full Song because I do plan on keeping this separate from the loop we wind up pulling out of it, just for reference. Let's make sure we're in song mode and then hit spacebar to play to make sure that we're getting a signal. Yes, we are. Let's click on that sampler channel in the channel rack. There's a couple other things that we want to do here. We want to change the mode from resample to stretch. This is because I know I want to turn up the tempo on this sample. Stretch will allow us to do that and it'll maintain the pitch and it'll keep it in time with the tempo as we change it. Which is also good because we're going to be changing the pitch next too. In tracklib, I had it pitched up 2 values and you see we're already in the range of 2, so let's just bump this all the way up so we get a higher pitch. Let's listen to that. Hit spacebar. Good. Now we just need to take care of the tempo. Let's turn that up. I think I want it around, how about 170? And let's take a listen to that. All right, it's got a little bit more energy now. I'm liking that. All right, looks like we're set up good enough that we can start chopping up this loop and making a beat out of it. Lucky for us today, I think this loop's gonna be pretty easy to work with. It's at the very beginning of the whole song. And by looking at this, it looks like this song is actually in perfect tempo, which isn't always the case when you're downloading tracks from tracklib. Let's make sure this is our loop. I believe it is the first 9 bars. Let's hit play and listen. Yep, that's it. And it really is perfectly on tempo. So we could just slice exactly on 9. Let's hit B to pull up our brush tool. We're going to click on the part of the waveform that we just sliced out. We're going to leave this entire song in its own arrangement so we could come back to it and reference it if we ever need to. So let's go to arrangement. Let's add one. We can leave it as arrangement 2. And then let's just go ahead and paint in that waveform that we just selected. Now this loop is already 8 bars, which is pretty standard in rap and hip hop music, but I have an idea for this that will make it a little bit different. I listened to this and I know that this little section right here, I want to loop 1 additional time, which would then push this out to a 10-bar loop. Let's hit C to select our cut tool. Let's get in here and cut this piece out. All right, let's hit B to go back to our brush tool. We're going to move this over so that way we can now click this with our brush tool. We can paint it in, drop it in place. Let's push this back to where it belongs. And now you can see it's a 10-bar loop. Here's the 10th bar. It ends right there. At this point, you might be wondering, why are we making it 10 bars if rap is typically an 8-bar loop? It just stemmed from an idea for a vocal arrangement I had where every time this loops, the first 2 bars are some sort of a hook, a phrase, a melody, or even just an instrumental break where there are no lyrics, has a space to live. Let me show you what I mean. Just a disclaimer, this is definitely not going to be a good performance, but this is more of a demonstration of the idea for the vocal arrangement. So let's try it out. This is where the hook would live. On bar 1 when the rapper starts rapping. Bar 2 is where the rapper keeps rapping. Bar 3 is where the rapper keeps rapping. Bar 4 where the rapper keeps rapping. But then we're back to the hook again. Bar 1 and the rapper keeps rapping. Bar 2 when the rapper keeps rapping. Bar 3 when the rapper keeps rapping. Bar 4 when the rapper keeps rapping. And we're back to the hook again. Something like that. Or like I said, even just an instrumental break, because what we're going to do here, we're also leaving space to do something instrumentally. I have some ideas for some drum hits that are really going to stand out to differentiate those first 2 bars from the other 8 bars where the rapping's meant to take place. So let's keep moving forward. We're going to get there and you're going to see what I'm talking about even better. Real quick before I do the drums, I forgot I did want to make this a unique sample, so we had a sample loop as one waveform. That's why we originally named this full song. So to fix that really quick, I'm just going to right click on track 1. I'm going to go to consolidate this track. I'm going to do it from track start. Here's the settings for this output. Let's hit start. And now it consolidated all of those chops into one loop. And then it actually grouped and disabled the parts that made this up. So if you wanted to undo it, you could. We'll just leave that there. We'll just minimize this. And now we can rename this to our sample loop. Let's head back over here to the mixer. Make sure we have it selected. Right click, channel routing, route selected channels to this track. Now the sample loop's on its own fader. We don't need to hear the full song anymore. It's not in our arrangement currently anyway, but I'm going to turn this down. So let's get into the next thing. Let's start laying down some drums. If you've watched my videos before, you know I'm a big fan of drum weapons. So I'm going to grab a kick from Drum Weapons. I wanted something that really hit hard. This is one of my favorite go-to kick drums from the Drum Weapons 4 set. Crispy Kick 01. Let's bring that out. And then while we're here, I also know what snare I'm going to use. Also from Drum Weapons 4. It's under snares. It's the Crispy Snare 01. So Crispy Kick and Crispy Snare. It's like they were meant to be together. Let's select both of these. Let's go over to our mixer. Right click on Insert 4. Channel routing. Route selected channel starting from this track. And now we got them both on here. But let's rename this just to Kick and Snare to make it simple. Okay, I went and figured out the notes for the kicks and the snares. I renamed the pattern to drums. Let's go over to the playlist. We'll drag in that pattern. Make sure we pull it to the beginning here. Let's close out of this. I'll show you the notes while I play it back. The kick notes are in green, and you can see the snare notes are in gray here too. So you kind of can see both patterns at once. Let's give this a listen. Cool, it sounded pretty good. I do just want to do a couple things to the snare. First, I want to change this pitch a little bit. Let's try to lower it. Yeah, I like the way that sounds better. And just thinking ahead, I pretty much always put some kind of reverb on the snare. So let's set that up now while we're working on the snare. Let's select the snare, right click the insert next to it. Sidechain to this track. Let's rename it Snare Reverb. Okay, good. Let's go back to our snare insert. I like to use slot 10 for my Fruity Sends. We're going to add Fruity Send. We're going to send to Snare Reverb. Let's close that. Let's go ahead and play. Make sure we're getting a signal. Yep, we see it coming through. We're going to go to slot 1 on the Snare Reverb track. I'm going to use Valhalla Vintage Verb. You could use any reverb you want. Just make sure that the mix is all the way up and the dry is all the way down. We're going to leave the default settings. That's why I love this plugin. I usually don't tweak much. I leave the default settings and I just adjust the volume, maybe a little EQ. So let's listen. Turn it up. Yep, there it is. And now let's just blend it in. Just trying to find a good starting point for this, because later when there's more instruments, we might want to adjust that mix. This is just thinking ahead. All right, the kicks and the snares are in. I want to add some cymbals to really accent those hits and the first 2 bars, maybe some additional cymbals throughout the rest of the 8 bars of that loop. I'm thinking to go with something real sounding to fit the sounds of the audio sample that we're using. I have a drum plugin that sounds pretty real. Stephen Slate Drums 5. If you don't have this, you can use whatever you got, any sort of cymbal hits. And before we actually lay down the notes, let me route this. I'll go on Insert 7. Channel routing, route selected channels to this track. This mix is running kind of loud, and Stephen Slate Drums is a little bit of a lower volume plugin. So I'm actually going to go and throw Fruity Compressor on here. Not to compress it, just to turn the gain up so I can hear the cymbals better. It's sort of a cheat just for this video. I'd usually mix at a lower volume. I figured I'd throw that detail in, especially if you are using Steven Slate drums. You might know what I'm talking about. All right, we're going to use SSD5 Classic Library. Let's do category Classic Vintage. We're going to use Classic Ballad. It's the one that I found. Those are the two cymbals that we really want to paste in. We can play along with it to get an idea of what we want to do, because we can click on these and actually hear the sounds while it plays. So if I like play the beat and then I hit these cymbals, something like that. I'm going to figure out a pattern and then I'm going to show it to you. Okay, I got the pattern figured out. It's a mix of a crash and a splash and an open hi-hat. Really adds some energy to this beat. Let's take a listen. Cool, that's really sounded good. I like that a lot. I can't help but think while I'm doing this though, even though this is a Drake and Rick Ross type beat, I'm also getting like Lupe Fiasco vibes, like that track kick push. Let me know down in the comments what you think of that. What type of vibes is this beat giving you? All right, the cymbals sound good. Everything sounds good in the drums. I think we're done with the drums. Let's move on and put some bass on this. Because even though the sample has some bass in it, we want to add some real hip hop low end to it. So I got something in mind. Let's do that now. Let's get into our channel rack. I'm going to add a contact plugin for this. And again, this is another one of those situations. If you don't have this plugin, just find a plugin that you have that does do bass and work with that. I didn't always have all these plugins. I've been doing this for a long time and I collected them over time. Especially in the beginning when I was super broke and using FL Studio free version. I use Boo-Bass sometimes. I have a YouTube short on that, by the way. I can link that in the description. 3x oscillator, just any whatever bass samples you have, 808s, just go for it. We're going to change this to dub bass because the dub bass is a really deep sounded bass. It's great for like reggae dub, but it's also great for hip hop and it sounds super smooth. What we're using is the Scarbee Rickenbacker Bass, by the way. That's it. No changing of any other settings, just selecting dub bass. We're going to close out of this. Again, I'm going to figure out a pattern, and then we're going to look at it and play it and talk about it. All right, I figured out a few things. Let me review them with you. First of all, I routed the bass, but by this point in the video, you should know how to do that. I added a little bit of an EQ to the sample loop where we cut some of the low end out. Since we're adding bass and we're adding low end, we wanted to cut some of those frequency from the sample loop so they don't conflict too much. Now the sample does have a bass line in it, and I like that bass line. It sounds good, so we don't want to remove it completely. But now that we have our own kick in there, now that we're adding our bass, we do want to remove some of that. So we're doing a cut like this on the EQ and the sample loop. On the bass, we added some Fruity Fast Distortion, and I'm going to show you why in a second. Let's just look at these notes and listen to it really quick. It's adding that low end, and it plays right on a kick when the kick hits in certain spots. Let's listen to it with the bass and then pull the bass out so we can really see what that low end is doing. Now the low end's gone. Let's bring it back in. I'll talk about the Fruity Fast Distortion. On a bass, especially like the dub bass, it's very low end heavy. There's not a lot of mids and there's not a lot of highs in the frequencies. Especially nowadays, a lot of people are listening to music on their mobile phones. And if you only have low end in your bass, chances are it's not going to come through the mix on mobile. So I normally try to pay attention to what's going on in the middle and in the highs of an EQ for the bass. And if the mids and the highs are really not there, Fruity Fast Distortion is a really quick way to bring those frequencies in so it'll cut through on mobile a little bit more. Let me show you what I mean. I put this parametric EQ on here, not to actually do any EQ, but just to visualize the frequencies that I'm working with. So I'm going to turn Fruity Fast Distortion on and off and pay attention to the activity on the right side of the parametric EQ over here. And you'll see that it's adding mids and highs when we put the Fruity Fast Distortion on. So let's play it without Fruity Fast Distortion first. A little bit of activity in the mids, but it's very low end heavy. Now we turn on Fruity Fast Distortion. There we go. Now we got some activity over there. Just so you know what I did, I left the default settings for the most part. I just dialed in the mix knob to really control the amount of that distortion that was being applied. So if we turn it up, I mean, then we'll really see it going wild over here. But that's a little bit too much for me. And it's one of those things where maybe you bounce this down and you listen to it on mobile and you see if that's enough, if the bass comes through still. For now, I think the bass is in a pretty good place. There's always room for improvement, but we got more to do, so let's move on. I think there's two more things that I want to do with this sample, with this beat. For one, I really like this drum fill at the end here. Let's listen to that. I love drum fills in hip-hop beats. I love drum fills just in general. This isn't a must-have for this beat, but I figured let's throw it in the video. Why not? We're going to replicate that drum fill in Steven Slate drums so we can make it pop a little bit more through the mix. Since we already have an instance of Steven Slate drums plugin on our channel rack, we could just right-click and clone it. We cloned it, we routed it, but I also want to take that compressor that we threw on the last Steven Slate drums just to take advantage of the gain knob. We're going to save preset as, we're going to drag that, and we're going to put it right on insert 9. So we have the same gain boost on insert 9 because like we said before, Steven Slate drums is a little bit low and this mix is running loud right now. So this is our quick fix. Let's make a new pattern for this drum fill. Let's call it drum fill. Now, we're just going to be playing along with the fill to try to figure out where these notes go. And we really only want to hear at this point what's playing from the sample loop and what's playing from our fill pattern so we can really dial that in. Let's go into the piano roll. Let's listen. And you know what else we might also want to do is drag that pattern that we just created out into the spot that we're looping. So that way, as we paint the notes, we will hear them. Let's get back into the piano roll. Let's take a look at this. First of all, I need to find the toms. Then we got to figure out how to put them in place. Now, if you're listening, those sound like triplets. So if that's the case, we're going to have to make sure that we have our magnet tool set correctly. So we would want 1/3 of a beat in order to be able to paste triplets in. You know, if I zoom in, you can see for each measure within the bar, we have 1, 2, 3 spots now. And you know what? I'm going to find the notes and paint them in. Let's see if we were right. Okay, so I found the snares that I was going to use, and I also found the low tom. We're trying to match the sounds as best as possible, and that sounded close enough to what was happening with the sample, but let's listen to that. It sounds like a little too much. In fact, I think the snares on the sample actually stand out well enough that we don't need to double down on those. So I'm going to hit T, which automatically selects the mute tool for me, and I'm just going to drag over those notes to mute them out temporarily while we work to see what that sounds like. Yeah, I can still hear the snares coming through on the sample pretty well. I like those. And this sounds pretty good. You can see what we did. It was triplet. So it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And listen, it syncs up with the other drum fill. And to really make sure that we have these notes in the right place, we can slow down the tempo of the song and listen to it. Now, I'm not a seasonally trained drummer either. So if I'm using that wrong and I'm saying triplets and somebody's like, those aren't triplets, let me know, correct me, especially let us know down in the comments because I don't want to spread misinformation. I'm just trying my best when it comes to that. But let's listen really slow. I do know that if we use our ears, we can figure out how many notes there are. So it's... And these are muted right now, but let's mute them just so they don't distract us. It sounds like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think we got it. Let's put it back at tempo. Yeah, I think we got it pretty good. And on top of that, I did a little thing with the volume down here. You can see that I slowly raised the volume up. Basically just playing around to try to get this fill to pop through the mix. Now let's put it back in the mix and see if we accomplish that by doing these things. A little bit too loud, actually. Let's turn this down. Maybe it needs a little bit of EQ too. I think they're a little bit too much low end. right, is that even really doing anything? Let's see. I'm going to mute him and play it, and then I'm going to pop him in and out. Yeah, it's doing something, but it's subtle. Let's turn it up a little bit. All right, that might be it right there. And you know, I don't want to waste too much time on this because we are just trying to make a tutorial video. I think we learned a technique. Let's just call it on this one. I think it's good, and we'll leave it into. It actually doesn't sound too bad. All right, let's move on to the last and final thing, which is a pretty simple thing to do. That sample is not an old sample. Sometimes older samples have a warmer feel to them, like they came off a record or something, or analog tape. This thing sounds really crisp. I'm going to try for the feel of this beat to make it sound less crisp, so we're just going to add an RC20 on the master. RC20 retro color. Let's see what the default sounds like right out of the box. Sounds good, but it's almost a little too fuzzy for me now. Yo, let's just play with it for a minute, see if we get it to sound a little bit better. Here we go. Again, that's a start. I think it sounds cool. I think it sounds good. Would I call this beat finished if I was actually working on it, not really just doing a tutorial? I'm not sure. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments section about this tutorial, about this beat. I really do appreciate when you guys leave comments. It helps my videos out so much. It gets them into the YouTube algorithm. Any sort of engagement or activity like likes, comments, and subscriptions especially really help my channel. I'm going to let this beat play out at the end, and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks, guys. Peace out.